Player podcast. This is episode number 3. I am your host, Wayne Dunn, and today we're going to talk about the non-Power 5 college football teams, conferences, and just the teams who we think can sneak up and surprise some folks. So today on our panel, we have Rick Bosch, who is one of our feature writers for Coach and Player Magazine. We got Jeremy Adcock, who's one of the writers from Underdog Dynasty, which is part of SB Nation. And we have PM Eden, also known as Funky Man, who's going to share his insight as well, who's also is a musician and has some music as well that we're going to talk about later on the podcast. So, gentlemen, before we get started, I just want to remind our listeners that you can find Coach and Player Magazine on coachandplayer.com. You can also subscribe to our magazine through that website, as well as listen to our podcast, as well as our previous podcast as well. So gentlemen, let's talk about the non-Power 5 conferences. I mean, we're all used to the Big Tens and the ACCs and NCCs, and they're always the ones that get a lot of the play. But there's the smaller conferences who have some great teams, and this year there are a couple teams that are nationally ranked. And there's probably a couple more that's probably could be ranked as well. What do you guys thoughts on that?
Well, basically, you got the American Athletic Conference. They've been killing it right now. They got 4 undefeated teams right now. You got Temple, you got Memphis, Navy, and Houston all undefeated. And then you might even make a case that Cincinnati might be the best team out of them all. Right now, Toledo and Boise State are ranked in one poll, and Toledo and Memphis are ranked in the other poll. So, I mean, you got a lot of good teams coming out through Toledo being from the MAC. You got a lot of good football going on, and you can't count out Boise State because they're always Boise State.
Right. Rick, what you think?
Absolutely, I would agree. And any mention of non-power conferences, you got to bring up Boise State. You're looking at a program that 8 of the last 10 years has won 10-plus games, 4-1 right now, and there's probably not another game on their schedule that they should lose. You mentioned the MAC, that's one of my favorite conferences, but also don't forget about Conference USA. You got a Western Kentucky team that's 4-1, and so is Marshall. What those two teams can do the rest of the season, who knows? But playing some good football in the non-Power 5 conferences.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I did notice as well with these conferences, that a lot of these teams are coming up from the 1AA or FCS division, and they're moving up, and they're just from the gate they're starting to do well. I mean, you mentioned Eastern Kentucky. Was it Western Kentucky you mentioned? But then you also got teams like Georgia Southern as well down in I think they're in Conference USA as well, right?
They're Sun Belt.
They're Sun Belt, yeah.
Well, but you also have these teams, who are perennial powerhouses in 1AA, and now they're jumping in and they're in the mix. I mean, they're in the mix. Appalachian State is also, I think, is up there now. They're trying to do big things. So, for those who aren't familiar with the process, Jeremy, to get one of these teams into one of the playoff slots, what is the requirement right now?
Well, the requirement is basically for a G5 team is they have to go undefeated is basically the only way it's going to go to get to the playoff. You have to be ranked one of the top 4 teams, and realistically, it's going to take a lot of big schools losing games and a G5 team pulling undefeated streak. I mean, you have a team like Temple who already has a win over Penn State. You got to be pulling for Penn State the rest of the year. That if the better Penn State is, the better that win that Temple has over them looks. And if they can stay undefeated and a couple teams lose, because you saw in the SEC this weekend, teams were losing left and right that were supposed to win. So if you can get those wins and just get one of those teams that can just pull themselves up to the top 4, because it's a selection committee, so you never know what they're going to go with. So it's a little tricky this year because we're still trying to get all the kinks out of the whole playoff system.
Yeah, and it always seems like, these polls, they're always biased. Or let's be honest. It seems like it's skewed towards the big conferences. They're the money conferences. They're the ones with the big contracts. Their mere presence bring the crowd. I mean, we're going to have a sellout this on the 31st when Temple plays Notre Dame. It's probably going to be a strong Notre Dame following there at the stadium. So, and right now there's only a 4-team playoff. Have they talked about expanding it to 6 or 8, make it more realistic to allow some of these smaller conferences, but not have to be undefeated and set the world on fire and walk on water just to get a sniff in the playoffs?
Well, there's been talk of it in the past year or so, but really what the NCAA is looking at is they want to stick with a format for 3-4 years, and then I believe that it's going to end up at an 8-team playoff at one point, but it may be 5, 6, 7 years down the road before we see that.
Okay. So, Rick, it seems like eventually once these teams are starting to continue to do well and getting a strong following and starting to beat some of these bigger conference teams, that's almost going to invite these bigger conferences to poach some of these teams.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the school that probably is next on the list is Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember the Louisville model a few years back, where Louisville would play Thursday night games, it seemed like every week. But what it did is it got them on national TV, and that program makes a jump to the ACC. And now Memphis, same kind of thing. They're gonna play some primetime games. They got a big one coming up with Ole Miss. So who knows? Maybe they get some national exposure. If they keep the win streak going, that's going to be a plus as well. But that's a program that could find himself in another conference soon.
Okay. Now, let me go back to the MAC, because you brought up the MAC earlier. It's one of your favorite conferences.
Yeah.
Toledo is currently nationally ranked.
Yep.
And I remember when Temple was there were some good programs out there. But one of the things that I've noticed about a lot of these football conferences is that they also have strong basketball teams that kind of carry them with name recognition. For example, the AAC, we got Connecticut, you got Temple, you got SMU.
Right.
One of the challenge, and that usually the basketball team is usually part of the package when you bringing them over to a big conference. Do you see any potential for any of the MAC teams getting any sniffs or plays?
It's doubtful. Like you mentioned the basketball tie-in. The MAC's not, that's not a strong basketball conference. They play great football. The reason I love the MAC, I still coach high school football, and I've got a handful of kids that have gone on and played football in the MAC. And it's just very competitive. Whether one of those schools could make a jump to another conference, I kind of doubt it. But you never know.
Jamie, what do you think?
Yeah, he's probably right on the whole MAC, nobody being able to jump to a bigger conference. Although there's an interesting aspect coming up in the next couple of years that it's either the end of this year or the end of next year, UMass's contract ends with the MAC.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of in limbo on what they're going to be doing in the future. They could, if they could put their football program into something solid in these next couple of years, I could actually see them making a jump to maybe the American Athletic Conference, because they have the basketball program like you're talking about. They have a historically good basketball program, and the AAC wouldn't mind getting into Boston as far as a media market as well. So sometimes it comes down to a media market with these teams, and with UMass being their location, there's a good chance that they could end up maybe sitting out a year as a independent, maybe 1 or 2 years as independent, and then ending up in the American Athletic Conference in the next couple of years.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I remember when they played Temple, and they played this tough. They played this real tough, and I think last year was their first year in 1A or Bowl FBS.
Yeah, first.
And And I agree. If they could get their program up and running, even though leaving the MAC, I still think they are attractive because they have the Boston market. I mean, you got BC, but they're in the Big Ten. But for other conferences, like I see another conference going after them. I know there were talks a couple of years back just scrapping the whole program. I hope they don't do that because you need more than just BC up there in the Boston area in Division One football. Um, I can see them going into the AAC as well. But do you see any other like do you guys see any one AA programs who's strong enough to move up to move into like an AAC or the MAC or?
Well, the best FCS program right now is probably North Dakota State. Whether or not they want to make the jump, who knows? I mean, there's a lot of requirements from the NCAA that you have to meet before you can make the move. I don't know that they'd be interested in doing it, but they surely are a great program.
Well, and right now you have Coastal Carolina, who is the current #1 team in 1AA or FCS, and they've actually made the decision that they're going to make the jump starting, I believe, next year, going to the Sun Belt Conference.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So and one of the reasons the Sun Belt really wanted them was their location. They needed a travel partner with Appalachian State because Appalachian State has been kind of, since they joined last year, they're in North Carolina, and there's not really anybody else in the Sun Belt that is close to them. So bringing in Coastal Carolina, which has a solid basketball program and a really good baseball program as well. So, I mean, they're getting a pretty good package with Coastal Carolina. But you could see someone else like an Eastern Kentucky, a Liberty, there's a few other 1AA schools that could be looking at to fill out the Sun Belt because the Sun Belt really wants to get to a conference championship game and they need 12 teams for that.
So let me put a crystal ball out there for you guys. Two questions. One is, which team do you believe can make it to the playoffs, given, we do get an invite, the smaller conference get an invite? And then two, where do you see the landscape of these non-power conferences, say, in the next 5 years? Do you see them remaining as they are? Do you see them merging? Do you see them being poached and just being totally gone? What are your thoughts?
Well, this year, like I said earlier, the Temple just seems like the best bet if they can pull. They have a tough schedule. I mean, like you said, the Notre Dame game, they got at East Carolina, which is playing really well with the double quarterback system they got going on, and several other good teams. But if they can get the right breaks, Temple does have the strength of schedule and ability to make a jump and possibly get into the playoff.
I can tell you the city will go crazy if that happens. I know I will go crazy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They probably are they probably are the best bet. They've got the win over Penn State. If they beat Notre Dame and the rest of the country beats each other, there's a shot. Same with Memphis. Memphis plays Ole Miss. If Ole Miss goes on a tear and rips it up in the SEC, that makes that win look a heck of a lot better. But either way, it's a long shot.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you see any of these conferences merging or just getting poached to the point where they just scrap the football conference side of it, or do you see them maintaining where they are? And
right now, I'd see they have the five conferences set up right now, where it seems like it's a good setup for them. That everybody's getting they're working together. One thing is to get a lot of G5 versus G5 games, like MAC versus Sun Belt, MAC versus Conference USA, American versus Conference USA, Mountain West, getting all them together. So I think that's the future. They're going to stay in their 5 conferences, but they really want to make sure they're playing more games against each other. They still want to play the big schools, but they want to also play each other a lot more, get those games where they can win and they look like good win, and they're good wins as well, but they're not going out and getting $1.5 million to get beat 55-7 by USC.
Right. Cool. So, guys, any closing remarks So closing thoughts?
Go ahead, Jim.
Well, my closing thoughts are just that this is a really good year to be watching G5 football. I got 6 teams that I think are quality football teams that could easily be in the top 25 in Toledo, Temple, Boise, Memphis, Navy, and Houston. Just being able to see that many teams that could push for top 25 rankings and could beat a big-time school on any given weekend it's just a fun thing to watch this year.
Cool. Rick?
Yeah, I would agree. You know, I mean, I'm always an underdog lover, I guess, and like I said, I really love MAC football. And any conversation about G5s, like I said earlier, you know, you need to talk about Boise State. I mean, you're going to see a lot of these teams that you know, they may end up unbeaten or with one loss, and it'll be exciting. A lot of them will end up in great bowl games. But I don't think that any of them are anywhere near playoff caliber yet.
Yeah. Being selfish, and I've been accused of being Temple focused on these podcasts, but I'm a Temple alum, so I'm hoping and praying that the stars align and our football program gets that kind of play and actually make some noise. Now, I'm not expecting a national title. I just want to get a good record, but you know, my prediction, I'm hoping to see Temple it's for years to go, years to this point forward, make some noise. So, you know, I want to thank you guys for joining us on the podcast. I'm actually going to shift the discussion away from the non-Power 5 conferences and talk about some music. We have a special guest on the podcast, Paul P.M. Eden, also known as the Funky Man, as our musical guest. So I want to welcome him again to our podcast. Paul, can you hear me?
Yep, I got you.
All right. So, and I know we had talked prior to the podcast, and you mentioned you wasn't too heavy in the college football game, but who is your college football team? If you had to pick one that you follow, who do you normally follow?
Well, right now it's Temple, because I'm in Philly, and I'm actually right on Temple's campus pretty much every week doing something musical, you know. So I've been watching Temple whenever I can and just, you know, hoping for the best.
Cool. Now I got a chance to listen to your music, and like I mentioned earlier, I was digging it. I thought it was real good. Who's your musical influences?
Well, unfortunately, it's a little bit of everything and everybody, depending upon the time. You can go from Jimi Hendrix to Prince to Mozart, Sly and the Family Stone, AC/DC, Led Zeppelin. I mean, it's all over the place. Hip-hop stuff, I like Common, Talib Kweli, of course Jay-Z and all that stuff. Even a lot of new school rappers. I like all that stuff. So it depends upon the day, you know. And I'm a musical educator. I work at Girard College, and I'm a teacher there.
Stop. You work at Girard College, man?
Yeah, man.
I spent 7 years working at Girard College, but we'll talk about that offline.
Oh, okay. Yeah, man. So I'm like the fine arts department chair here. So I've become sort of a musicologist, teaching a little bit of everything. So it depends upon the day, you know.
Right. Now, have you been doing live shows? Have you been trying to tour outside the Philadelphia area, or you just stayed local so far?
No, well, I mean, like, I've done a whole bunch of stuff. I've been the guitar player for Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry. I used to play with this artist, a hip hop artist, a girl named Khalees. I played with Dawn Robinson from In Vogue, and a whole bunch of other artists, man. So I've toured the world. I've been a guitar player for a guy named T.M. Stevens, who co-wrote Living in America with James Brown, and was Joe Cocker's bass player for many years. And so I've been on stages in front of about 100,000 people all the way down to 20 people. And I've also been a soloist for the Philadelphia Boys Choir and Men's Chorale ever since I was a kid. And just left there a few years ago because, you know, I just had to work on my own music as well as, do some other corporate ventures.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So in terms of the artists that you performed with over the years, who's been, and you don't have to, if you don't want to, you don't have to, who's been your most difficult person you worked with? Who's been the most demanding musician?
Well, I think it was a funny thing, but I guess one of the most demanding musicians was Chuck Berry. And because I guess, you know, in his, I don't want to say in his old age, but, you know, as a musician, you get set in your ways after time. And he played. He knows what he knows, and he's actually infamous for being very difficult. They did a documentary on him about 15 years ago, and Keith Richards from the Stones, loves Chuck Berry and they're friends, and he played in Chuck's band for this documentary, and he cursed Keith out right there on the film, and it ended up on, as a part of the film, and that's just notorious at Chuck. And right there on the stage, he laid out the drummer. The drummer supposedly wasn't playing in time, but it was actually Chuck. But you can't tell him that because it's Chuck Berry.
Exactly.
He's berating the guy on stage, and we're all just feeling bad, But that's probably the most difficult, But I've had, funny stories about pretty much any and everybody that I've played with, because the road is a funny and peculiar place, because you're stuck on a bus or you're stuck in hotels with the same people day in, day out, much like, just like with sports teams, you got to learn to work together, but and hopefully there's not too much of a hierarchy, in the team, but with music there definitely is. The artist is the artist, and you there just working, so.
So you mentioned you worked at Girard College. Can you share some background for those who aren't familiar with Girard College?
Yeah, well, Girard College started off in the 1830s as a school for orphan white males. Stephen Girard, who was like the 5th richest man in America during the time, the Donald Trump of his day, decided that after the War of 1812, which he helped fund, that there were a lot of men who died, and there were a lot of orphans around, and he realized that if this country was going to be a strong country, you needed to take care of the men or the next generation so that we wouldn't have anarchy in the streets. So he decided he was going to, bequeath a city trust with money to build a school to take care of all the orphan boys whose fathers died in the war. Not necessarily a racist thing, but during that time, his concern was really for all the white males. Meanwhile, while it was also the foundation of the Hershey School and many other boarding schools of the day that came right after him, in the 1960s, it became a part of sort of an eyesore in Philadelphia, because it was the one place right there in the heart of North Philly where there was mostly African-American community, and they were not allowed in. So in the 60s, Cecil B. Moore and Martin Luther King marched on the school many times and had many protests, and finally were able to overturn part of his will, because the Board of City Trust was holding on to the money, so it was a public institution. So you are not allowed to discriminate if it's a public institution. So it became open to all races in the 60s, and in 1987 they opened it up for girls as well. So that's the quick and dirty history.
Yeah, and it's an astounding history, because, like you mentioned, it is right in the middle of North Philadelphia, and for years it was a school that kids in the neighborhood weren't allowed to go to, and then when they opened the doors and made it more diverse over the last 40 years, there's a lot of great students that came out the program. For disclosure, I used to work there for 7 years, like I mentioned earlier, so I've seen the growth of the school and the diversity of the school now, and it's a very diverse program, and the music program. So you mentioned that you're the Fine Arts Chair. What are some of the initiatives that you're implementing there at Girard College?
Well, right now, the most recent thing is I've actually gotten, for the past 10 or 15 years, we have an organ here on Girard that's actually a world-renowned organ, but no one has actually been able to come and see or hear, because the school's sort of been in a closed-door, sort of shut-down mode. So I've created an organ guild here to sort of get the awareness back up on the organ. The Philadelphia Orchestra has been here numerous times during Dr. Martin Luther King Day of Service. Actually, Girard College is now the home of, or the home base for Dr. Martin Luther King Day of Service. And so that's one of the initiatives there. The Philadelphia Orchestra has been involved with that. All the kids in the lower and the upper school choir and bands have been doing a lot of, bang-up jobs musically. We just recorded a video redoing Common and doing the song Glory from the film. Mm-hmm. And we were at the National Liberty Museum for an essay contest, singing that song there, and producers from the film from Paramount Pictures have seen it. So we've been doing a lot of work here, as well as doing work with VH1 and Save the Music, working to sort of help fund money for other schools to be able to keep music in the schools. So it's been doing a lot. Yeah.
Good stuff, man. So who's your favorite? Let me jump back to sports real quick. Who's your favorite pro football team?
Man, I don't know. You know, there's always hope for the Eagles, but
Not today.
It's just hoping. You know. And there's a lot of folks on our campus right now that are Pittsburgh fans, but they're not doing well either right about now. You know, there's some days I like Atlanta, and some days I like San Francisco. But right now, it seems like it's a crapshoot. I want to wait for things to sort of settle down for a bit, so and see what really happens, you know. But since I'm in Philly, I'm gonna hang out there with the Eagles and try not to be basic Philly fans. When we're winning, we're winning. When we're losing, I hate you.
Well, good luck with that, bro.
Trying to hold on, you know.
So to close out, if we wanted to hear your music, how can we reach? How can we hear your music? How can the fans or our listeners?
Well, the easiest thing is to always, you know, just go to iTunes or the Play Store, and you can check out Funky Man, spelled with a PH, UNKYMAN. All the albums are there at all the download sites anywhere. Obviously, you can go to Spotify, but sometimes I don't try to promote that because they give you 0.001 cent on the play, so you don't really make any publishing. And I always say support local artists because in this day and age, man, you know, all the kids that are coming up, even the ones that I teach. I'm trying to get them to promote their own music, and everyone's got to support it. So support local artists. You know, a kid like PNB Rock, who is just now getting ready to get signed, is a local artist who has been doing YouTube videos and all that stuff for his music, and is now making a huge impact. You know, due to the youth actually going out and spending money on music. So you can get it there. You can also check out Reverb Nation and check out and search Funky Man. But it's pretty much everywhere, man.
Sounds good. Thanks, man. So, Jeremy, in terms of Underdog Dynasty, any other articles that you're working on right now?
Right now, I'm just doing a few game previews for the upcoming games. I got a East Carolina versus BYU preview coming up, and one for the Marshall versus Southern Miss game, which should be a great game because Southern Miss is playing much better than they were last year, and could be the surprise team of the Conference USA this year.
And we can find your articles on SB Nation under Underdog Dynasty, right? Yep. Did I lose him? Oh, I think I might have lost him. So, Rick, and anything else you want to cover, or any other new articles you want to talk about?
No, not really. I will say to the Funky Man, I did enjoy his music. I'm an amateur musician myself, and a huge Prince fan. So one of those songs he sent sounded a lot like Prince. I really liked it.
There was I heard a lot of different influences in his music. That's what I liked about it, because it didn't really fit into one genre. You know, it could pretty much fall under anybody can listen to it.
Oh,
if you're a music fan, you're going to enjoy the music. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you guys for joining us today. Again, for our listeners, you can find this podcast as well as episode 1 and 2 on coachandplayer.com. We're also on SoundCloud, and I think Frank is going to get us on iTunes and other sites as well. Again, thanks, fellas, and talk to you next time.
All right, Wayne. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.